Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the Sustainable Commodities Podcast, a podcast to help people navigate the ever-changing world of sustainability and sustainable commodities. I'm Barnaby Patchett, MD of 199 Agency, a marketing agency working in sustainability, and with me is my co-host.
Hi, it's Judith Murdoch, and I'm from Murdoch Associates, and we work in forest risk commodities.
In this episode, we're going to welcome our first guest from a major retailer to the podcast, Alistair Pattrick, who is the Sustainable Sourcing Manager at the Co-op. The Co-op has a long history of sustainability and responsible retailing, as it calls it. And today we're going to talk about what the Co-op's doing, and what it looks for in terms of sustainable suppliers. And we're going to talk about the sustainability landscape in wider detail as well.
So, Alistair, welcome. But would you like to start by talking a little bit about yourself and also your role at Co-op?
Hi both, and thanks for having me on. So I'm Sustainable Sourcing Manager at the Co-op. I've been in this role for, 7 years now, evolved over time. I'm responsible for sustainable sourcing across all the ingredients we use in our food industry, but obviously that's a wide brief, so lots of cross-functional working. Where my real focus has been on for certainly the last 2-3, probably a bit longer years, is around leading on our forest commodities work and how we address the risks within that and try and work towards the targets that the whole industry is trying to deliver on.
Yeah, that's quite a big brief. And one of the things that I would like to ask you is that you have had the chance to go out and go out into the field and see a little bit about palm oil. Could you just talk to us a bit about that and what you went on?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to talk about. I think it's probably one of the highlights of my time at the Co-op. I had the chance to go out to Malaysia, with a lot of time in Malaysia and Borneo back in November. Stuff like this is so important because I spend all this time working on these commodities that I am at the very far end of the supply chain, reading about lots of stuff. I can see photos, but, getting close to actually where the production is makes such a difference. So I'm very lucky that I had the chance to go and visit palm production in Malaysia and Borneo. So actually the main part of our trip was visiting our program that we have partnered with Chester Zoo on out there, which is around reforestation of former palm oil plantations. So reforesting to create a wildlife corridor connecting remaining forest areas together. It's a really exciting project and really shows the power of partnership because it's one of those things that we couldn't have designed ourselves and really tries to capture not just number of trees in the ground, but thinking about, okay, this is a landscape where you could be most effective, having the sort of biodiversity elements, which are increasingly, I think, understood as being important to, having those positive landscapes. So working with Chester Zoo and Hutan, the NGO on the ground, there's been tremendous work across the 5 or 6 years we've partnered with them. So I've been waiting a long time to go out and see where we've been working. We got to see the trees, trees that had grown to, in some cases, the level of secondary forest. So it gives you real hope, which is important when you're working in this sort of role. And there's so many challenges to see kind of that positive impact is really important. And alongside that, being in the production landscape, going around palm oil plantations, speaking to the people there, also speaking to smallholders, because the other project that we partner on is working with Solidaridad around smallholders in their NICEOPS program on climate smart production. Seeing these sort of real people to also remind you of that, of what sits behind those, we're going through annual reports at the moment. I see all the data that comes out of it, but what actually sits behind that and get that sort of nuanced view of how people are dealing with these things on the ground, and also what they're hearing, how some of the information is flowing back to them. So, feel very lucky, and it's definitely giving me a lot of inspiration taking into this year.
I had a very, very similar experience going out to the RT, to the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, and going on a field trip to see the smallholders and how it was grown, you know, having written about it for years and years, and then to finally see it and to speak to the people at that end, because it's so easy to be kind of stuck in our perspectives without thinking about just how long that supply chain is and just how far removed we are from it. So yeah, that resonates with my experiences too. And I understand you'll have met up with a good friend of the show, Kat Barton, from Chester Zoo as well.
Yeah, so Kat Barton, I've worked with her on this project for a long time, so I know her well. And Kat and the rest of the Chester Zoo team are a fantastic source of knowledge and passion for this area. And it's so important that you, I think, engage with as many people as possible working on these areas, like even with other retailers. Lots of what we do is collaborative. And it really helps that because nobody on their own has the scale or the knowledge to deal with these problems. Having those partners is really important. Yeah, Kat and everyone at Chester is absolutely fantastic, and the work they've done on the ground and more widely is amazing. I think, the Chester Zoo project is something that has really helped when we're communicating with our members around what we do on sustainable sourcing and palm oil particularly as a whole. And it's because, they're able to give us that input, that sort of credibility that is, there's so much we've got out of that partnership that, it's a real positive.
And the sort of confidence as well, because they're separated from the supply chain itself. When they say palm oil can be sustainable, it has a lot more weight than, they don't have the same vested interest as someone with lots of products with palm oil on their shelves that you do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can give customers and members all the facts so they can be 100% right, and I can fully be confident in them. But it's just not the same as someone, like you say, that doesn't have that vested interest, because someone's going to tell you, well, you would say that because it's in your interest. So having that credibility, from Chester to the partners we work with, and from the WWF Palm Scorecard, to kind of show and explain, these are partners that the average person will recognise as credible in the environmental and community space. So it's something I could never achieve away. So I'm very thankful for their insight and input.
Yeah, and we are going to talk about EUDR and UK Forest Risk Commodities Initiative, the due diligence. But before I do you think that retailers or large consumer goods manufacturers are doing enough to put trees back?
I suppose from my view, I'm so close to this stuff and so passionate. I don't think you're ever doing enough, because whenever you do something, there's always more you'd want to do. In terms of the sort of restorative angle, I think that's going to be hopefully increasingly get attention. Understandably, we can't do everything all at once, and there's been a lot of focus on kind of cleaning your supply chain and checking that the source is not causing further degradation and damage. But yes, absolutely, there needs to be a thinking about landscape more as a whole, but how you restore some of those, how you restore it in the right way. I think we saw with maybe the rush driven maybe more by carbon offset perspectives, that some of those ghost forest stories where people would just sign off, get as many trees in the ground as possible, and then you turn up 3 years later and there was nothing there because they hadn't been maintained, and maintenance was a key part of the program that we've supported. But that's a trade-off, because that means you don't have quite as many trees in terms of numbers that you put in the ground. So I think it just needs to work into sort of better projects. And what I'm hopeful of is, as nature moves up the agenda, so things like TNFD, where you've got science-based targets on nature, that will start, I guess, really link and help businesses understand the value more of doing better projects, because there's loads of great biodiversity impacts that we've had, and I can, have the figures on number of species and stuff, but it's not as understood or as easily understood in the way that a business could say, that's worth X ton of carbon, that's worth X% of our target. So I think hopefully, I guess you shouldn't have to put a value, a number on everything, but at the same time, it does help kind of get people to understand it and the right people to understand it and get behind it. And then hopefully we'll see an increase in sort of, that sort of restorative. I think, because, what you also want to see is not just stop the negative, but you want to have that true net positive impact to try get the world back to where it needs to be.
Going broader, I mean, you've mentioned kind of the business focus. Why is sustainable sourcing so important to Co-op?
So I think, as we kind of touched on in the intro, sustainable or responsible retailing has always been a key part of Co-op's ethos, and it's certainly an expectation of our members and customers, and I think other retailers as well, like people expect this. I think really getting into the sourcing detail is, for me, the importance. It's making sure that we're able to continue sourcing, because sustainability is completely linked to resilience. If you don't protect and restore the ecosystems, whether that be environment or community, if you see those collapse because they're being degraded or not protected, then you don't have the production. And that then, can lead to price spikes, or, just the ingredient not being available. We've seen with cocoa the impacts of climate on the production there, the lack of investment, an aging production workforce from people not going into that production. And as a result, cocoa prices have massively risen, and that had a material impact on, any business that's producing chocolate or cocoa products. So that is, the same sort of thing that is going to happen if you don't look at your sourcing. So not just, it's not just a case of nice to have or doing the right thing. This is an essential part of us being able to continue putting products on our shelves now and in the future. So thinking about that long term, it's really important that we get this right.
And how are you affected by the EUDR regulation?
So for Co-op, we are only directly impacted in terms of Northern Ireland stores, which is not a huge amount, but it is some exposure. So we've had to look at it there, and I've been working with the regulatory team over the last couple of years, and they are leading on making sure that we are compliant with anything going into Northern Ireland, because at the moment that is in scope of EUDR. Also, indirectly, of course, many of our supply chains run through the EU, or the imports are shared, like they're coming to the EU and the UK, and therefore they're not going to be necessarily separate. They're probably going to be pulled through to the same standard. So it's definitely been, just because I guess we've not got a direct EU presence, although the one route is like through wholesale, some does go through to EU. It's still been a massive part of last couple of years, and it's continued to drive a lot of the conversation. And although it's not been perfect by any means, I think it has given that push, because we've been trying for so long on voluntary commitments alone. Even the idea that regulation is coming just helps you move stuff on, and it gets people to take notice. So yeah, I still think it's a big part, hopefully, of what's going to help us get to where we need to be as Co-op, even without being in the EU ourselves.
What about the delay? What do you think about that?
So it's a funny one, because it went through a lot of emotions. I think by the end of it, it almost felt like a victory, because at some point it looked like it was going to be a lot worse with the push to kind of undermine or water it down anyway. So I think we kind of maybe like this false sense of, yes, we've got to win. It's not been delayed by more years. They've not added in the no risk categorization. But ultimately, any delay is a blow. I think from my point of view, it was becoming almost inevitable, I think partly because of the lack of guidance and the systems. And once those weren't out on time, it just became impossible I don't think there's anybody out there who could 100% say they were going to meet the exact letter of the law, and without knowing what the letter of the law was by the end of last year. So it did become a bit inevitable. But yeah, any delay in any commitment, it undermines confidence. People that have made progress already, then they'll say, well, why did I do that? And you don't want other people to benefit from that. Hopefully, it's trying to keep positive. Like, it's only a year delay, so the momentum should continue. It's not like a 5-year delay, like we see with some commitments get knocked back 5 years, so people then sit back. You've got to keep working through that stuff. So overall, I'm hoping, in particular, I think in terms of forest damage, like the cut-off date is remaining. So in theory, you've got that lots of point, that respirator cut-off date is so important. So not ideal, but as long as we use this next year to really, really take advantage and progress and, make good, efficient, aligned responses, then yeah, hopefully in the long term we won't be thinking too much that it was delayed. We'll be thinking about the impacts that it's had.
So what do you think about the fact that the UK legislation, which was discussed, almost promised, almost there, and then stopped because of the general election? So what's your view on the UK position on forest risk commodities?
This is an immense source of frustration for myself. I know many colleagues across the industry. Because, thinking back, at one point, it looked like the UK regs were going to come in before the EU. We were ahead of developing that. This was the world leading tag that was applied. And it's just that real uncertainty is immensely unhelpful. I know there were some challenges also in terms of alignment, and almost it felt at times deliberate misalignment with the EU for the sake of it. We know the primary legislation at the moment, the UK regs, wouldn't be up to the standard of the EU in terms of capturing the legal deforestation. So that's a big gap. But again, having some sort of regulations in the UK is still going to raise that floor, still drive that alignment, and still really show the sort of direction that we're heading in. It probably would then move up to hopefully more aligned level. So extremely frustrating that it was constantly delayed. And then, as you say, it was kind of felt like we were about to get through somewhere. And then the election came, and it's not been an immediate priority. I've not heard a lot about it from the new government. We've supported, we continue to use advocacy routes and support with the wider message. Retailers are clear. We want these regulations. We want them, to drive the change. That we can't drive on our own. It's not helpful for us to have a lower bar or that lack of alignment. So hopefully we will see some progress. I'm not sure I've heard that many reassuring noises from the background, because the little detail that we did have at the end of last year that kind of was sketching out where it was going, it seems like they've gone a bit back to the drawing board on those details. So I'm not even confident, again, kind of what the UK regs are going to look like. But to balance out on the positive side, I know there has been more conversation with the EU since the new government. And so hopefully that is then sharing some learnings through the development of the EU and maybe even some of the challenges they've had developing those regulations. So ultimately, hopefully we will get there. But yeah, still waiting.
Yes, well, a lot to learn from in terms of, I guess, the challenges surrounding the implementation.
Yeah, no, definitely. So what keeps you awake at night in terms of the commodities involved in both regulations?
Well, I mean, the whole thing, I think you have to be careful not to become overwhelmed by the whole scale of the problem that you're dealing with. In terms of, if I had to pick the one commodity that keeps me awake the most will be, not just at night, but during the day, is soy and animal feed. I guess because it's the most extreme of all the commodity examples in terms of scale of the amounts that we use that are produced and, you know, the land that is converted to produce it. That is one of the international trip I've been on, is out to Brazil to see soy production, and, you know, driving for hours through these endless fields, sort of impressive and terrifying at the same time to see the scale of it. It's something that we have been working on for so long, trying to make progress. We know even the whole UK market is only 1% of global soy production. So thinking about how we can really make that leverage count has been challenging, and it's obviously quite a fragmented in terms of certification landscape compared to palm oil, where RSPO has provided that sort of singular route. And you know, certification isn't the solution in itself, but it's such an important part for a retailer when we are so far away from these supply chains. Like, we don't have on the ground monitoring of palm oil plantation, and the commodity markets are moving around. So having a reliable, a credible certification is really important, and that's just not been the case in soy. And that's where we've had to look at, you know, kind of the routes around sort of verified sourcing and, you know, kind of trying to improve that traceability. And a lot of work, like on any of these, I guess, is collaboratively through groups like the Retail Soy Group and the UK Soy Manifesto, of trying to bring together people and businesses to scale up as much as we can the demand signal, and try and, you know, hopefully again, using the change that EUDR is going to drive, because I think soy is one of those examples where the ships are likely to be coming across from South America to Europe and the UK. Maybe you'd split your hulls, but it becomes easier just to have EUDR compliant soy in there. And it's a case of, just having the verification linked through. So that's one of the routes where hopefully it can unlock some progress, which, you know, we have been working away at for a long time. But yeah, it can feel like hard work sometimes. But I'm completely committed. I know many others are to getting us there.
It's interesting from my perspective anyway, to hear the difference between the perceptions and the consumer perceptions and the realities from a retailer's perspective, because, you know, the consumer perception is still that palm oil is the big issue, but actually EUDR, for the first time, we've seen all the commodities compared against each other and spoken about in the same kind of conversation. And whenever we speak to people at soya, that's the actual reality of the thing that's posing the most challenge.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I think, consumers, I suppose, it's always going to be that with the more tangible, the thing, the more they're going to be putting up their risk lists. You know, palm oil is an ingredient in a product. Soy is not listed on your pack of chicken breasts. So I think, although more people are aware of it, it's still not getting that cut through. Yeah, so definitely agree that's still a sort of message, and it's why it's then having the whole picture. I mean, well, not the whole picture, because there's more beyond the scope of the current EUDR, but a more rounded picture of everything that's in scope, I think hopefully is helping us think about these things in the right way.
So certainly when you get consumers asking you questions, what are the key consumer questions to you as a sustainability team?
As a whole, a sustainability team, I guess, like in terms of tangible stuff, again, like plastics will be high up the list, because again, that's something that they can see and touch and engage with every visit to the shops. I think wider awareness, people are picking up on those things, but COP that we've always worked on, like things like animal welfare is a big issue, and we continue to work on that. Climate too. I think for me personally, in terms of thinking to stuff that comes through to questions I have to answer, is I would say palm oil is probably the highest one, but I get less than I did, so that's kind of how I measure. I guess partly because the noise has died down a little bit, and because NGOs have focused campaigns on other areas that have become more of a priority. So we've seen, so in that space, a shift more to things like soy. And we do get some questions around soy, but in other areas, less so. I don't think people would necessarily associate deforestation with some of the other commodities like coffee, for example, which, will be a lot of consumers engaged with that product, but not thinking about it as a deforestation. So it is to be interested to see if that changes in the coming years.
Yeah, I think certainly consumers understanding what a chicken is fed on, you just don't get that, do you? It's more, I guess, about if it's raised in a barn or raised outside. So again, how do you see chicken welfare? What are the key drivers for a consumer there?
This is probably out of my area of expertise. But we know, our agri team is really committed to working on this with our suppliers and trying to, do the right thing. We know there's been a lot of attention around chicken welfare. We had the Space to Fried that was launched, I think that was last year. So we make progress, but yeah, there remain challenges. I'm not saying that by any means everything is solved.
Yeah. That was probably an unfair question to you, and it's intriguing, really, when you think about that is one of the palm oil image is orangutans, and soya does not have that same image at all.
It's like that sort of emotive, I guess, sort of poster child. So I've seen, but I have seen orangutans in the wild now. I can confirm that, you do get that sort of sense of wonder. So it's easy to see why it has that cut through. I think, sometimes soy's challenges that, it doesn't have the same sort of imagery to go with it. And I think, animal welfare is also part of the wider picture, having to balance some of these things, because we know try to progress on one area of sustainability, it can have unintended consequences in others. So that's why you always have to kind of try and work holistically as a team, and then also explain what you're doing and why, to try and help people understand that.
That's something that comes up so much on this podcast, is the iron law of unintended consequences. We were speaking to someone from the Global Roundtable on Sustainable Beef in probably the last episode, as people who are listening to this. The same problems are there. You address one thing, and something else crops up, another challenge crops up. In terms of kind of going back to the sort of wider supplier base, what do you look for in a sort of sustainable supplier?
So I guess in terms of ideal sort of, behaviours almost, or what you want from a supplier, is sort of always the key thing for me is being proactive, not just waiting for our customer asks us for this, then we'll do it. It's kind of understanding, kind of proactively, okay, these are the things we're sourcing. And again, to that resilience point of trying to protect their own future sustainable existence, kind of identify risks and what they will do about them proactively. Yes, you're not expecting them to take on the cost of everything themselves, but that would be the number one thing that I would like to see, and that I do see in some suppliers that would mark them out. And then I think, it's kind of, what else are you doing? I guess there's a kind of the progress against commitments, like what are your plans to do that, as well as being open about the challenges. Again, not just saying, we've got no problem. I think that's always a red flag. I think saying like, these are the challenges we've got, the issues across any area of sustainability, that's kind of a positive, as long as they're then working to come to those and how we can address them. And also, like, when suppliers are involved in collaborative work, because again, the same with that I've said with retailers, like, we have to work collaboratively on this stuff. I think there's a lot of power in suppliers, in industry groups collaborating, that is going to be the only way that we solve some of these shared problems where, we're all going after the same thing. And it's always like soy feed, for example, is one where we probably all going to succeed or all going to fail. So there's not really a competitive advantage. Yes, there's obviously limits to what you can discuss, and and on your product or your pricing, you'll have to keep that separate. But in terms of the sourcing side, there's a massive opportunity. So seeing suppliers that are taking that sort of active role, having the right resource allocated to sustainable sourcing, and proactive action, I think, is the key things.
So if you wanna get into the co-op supply chain, then make sure that you're proactively working on sustainability, that you're accountable, that you've got that traceability built in. Those are the things that people need to do.
Yeah, it sounds like. One of the questions I would like to just ask is, and our paths have crossed on this, particularly when we're thinking about suppliers and complicated supply chains, is oleochemicals and the use of palm oil, coconut and shea in shampoos. What again keeps you awake at night when you look at your home and personal care?
So, I suppose if we focus on palm oil, that is obviously, there's so much positive in palm oil progress that we've made. But I keep looking at that stubborn, I think it was last year in 2022, like 7% mass balance in our own brand products. And it's been at that sort of level for a few years now, because we're dealing, as you say, this sort of really more complex products, and because the way it's scaled, if you're not having, you have to massively scale up the oil production, because it's literally, it's a fraction of that to do it. I don't know whether maybe what stops it keeping up all night is, one, because other stuff is keeping up all night. So I feel like we've got, if I talk about our palm oil position as a whole, it feels quite defensible, and credible. But with those derivatives and fractions, what the solution is, and I think, thinking about what the solution is, maybe outside of segregated RSPO, what other controls can we add on to the mass balance? Again, like EUDR, although the annex list isn't everything in there, again, hopefully driving some of that change and driving some of that traceability, which again is kind of been lacking. And even with RSPO, to be honest, with until their new Prisma system comes out, again, I'm looking forward to see what that can do. There's been some lacks in the kind of traceability, so it feels like, I don't really know what all the answer is, but again, it's a good example of where it's a shared challenge, and again, like getting together in the oleochemicals working group and kind of getting that understanding. And even if I'm not going to pretend I have the technical knowledge, despite the many chemistry lessons that I've been through in those, kind of adding insight where I can and kind of linking to the right people, and hopefully, getting some of that. Because again, there's enough people that want the same thing out of that, some way of saying for those drivers and fractures, how do we show that they're deforestation and conversion free? How do we show that they're responsibly sourced? And I think, and the way methodically we're through, okay, what's the biggest one? Let's start there. And then just working through. I feel, again, there's hope because we have done stuff on Parble. I know it's not necessarily you could apply the same solutions, and I think we kind of realised that, it's not now linear of just that bit will fall next. But I think we've got enough of the principles and enough of the impetus behind that to kind of move it on. And again, maybe it won't be perfect, but it will be progress.
There's no silver bullets in sustainability.
No, certainly not.
Great. I think that's probably a nice place to end things. Thank you very much, Alastair, for coming on the show. And thank you very much to all of the listeners of the Sustainable Commodities podcast, and join us next time for more chat about sustainable commodities.
Thanks a lot. Bye.